And we're on the air with Wire106, Season 2, Episode 12.
I know, another season almost in the bag.
Yeah,
I mean, we're moving now. It's
yeah,
mid-semester. We've done 2 seasons of The Wire. We're gonna do 2 more. Um,
yeah.
I had Sid Bauman came in today, and I kept on calling her Amy. I felt bad. Sid Bauman came in, one of the students, Sid the kid, and she was like, "Yeah, it really is like no other class I've taken." She's like, "But the workload." And so I think the students are starting to really feel it. I mean, around week 7 and week 8 is when DS 106 kind of, you got the radio show, but I also think in some ways it becomes more focused. And, also if you're watching this and you're in the class, if you're having intense things with midterms and other stuff and you need to negotiate some stuff, let us know, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. We're negotiable people. We know it's a lot of work. We believe in trial by fire. But at the same time, there's more than enough evidence coming out of these blogs right now that you guys are doing kick-ass work and that, we can work with you. I mean, there's been amazing stuff. So keep it up. And, also if you have other things getting in the way and some weeks are more intense than others, don't get overwhelmed. Just let us know.
Yeah.
Okay?
But like we said, audio is very labor-intensive, time-consuming stuff, so everyone needs to be ready for that. Yeah,
It's true. They do. And they need to be ready to work together for the radio show. But
yeah,
I think that's why you stretch it out for 2 weeks. In fact, we spend 3 weeks on audio and basically 3 weeks on video. So it's almost pretty clean. And I think a lot of the audio stuff will help as you get into the video. So
yeah,
you realize just how much of the video is audio. And you'll have, I mean, sitting down with Sid today, and we have the DKC, which is a digital knowledge center here at UMW up and running. So one of our tutors helped her too. What you start to realize is just how much she knew, like how agile she was in Audacity by playing with it and by doing this stuff. It was pretty cool to see that. So I really
all
like that.
right.
Yeah. So I mean, it does pay off, and it is a lot of work. But we warned you, right? How many times do we have to warn you? 4, 5, 7 times.
Yeah,
And I feel bad because I'm coming off a sickness, so I've been pretty quiet. So I got to get my A game on.
yeah. Well, I guess it's not the worst time, because we're in a 2-week project here, so
Yeah, that's true. I
it's,
have to catch up on some of the design assignments, though.
yeah.
Goal this weekend.
All right.
All right. What do we got? We got season 2, episode 12. Storm?
Is that it? Storm warnings?
I think that's the name of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it storm warning or storm warnings?
Um,
No, I have to.
Good question. I didn't bring that part up. Let's see.
I think it's storm warnings. Let's see. Storm warnings.
Port in a storm. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Storm warnings was episode 10.
yeah.
Right. So port in the storm is episode 12. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, but it has two meanings, right?
Yeah. All right.
The
You
port
mean?
kind of in a storm of, political entanglement, cops, death. This is when
Yeah.
Tanaka has his exit from the scene. Um, but it's also kind of a quieting, right? Like you go to port and storm to kind of pull it all back together to avoid that.
Yeah. It's like a refuge. Like it's interesting because it's not really an ending point, but it's like a stopping point in between.
Yeah,
So as the end of season 2 and season 3 begins, yeah.
a lot less closure in this one, right? Like,
Yeah.
he gives Daniels the picture, Prop Joe and Stringer Bell are getting together. I mean, there's a lot of suggestion that this is by any means, this is a continuation of what's to happen come season 3. So
Yeah.
interesting, yeah. I mean, interesting meanings on that port and storm. So,
Yeah. Nice.
all right. So
Yeah.
first, our first um, thing we want to talk about. And it's something that comes up a lot. Should I show the first one?
Epigraph?
The epigraph.
Yeah, let's do that.
So let's take a look at this. So this is, I think this epigraph is spoken by none other than the Greek, right? So let's get it up here. And here, business. Always business.
Yeah, business, always business. Yeah. So yeah, it says something about the businesses they're in. Um, I guess they're talking about um, like they're going to leave a can full of heroin on the docks, basically, at that point.
Yeah, but it's interesting because when he says this, it's actually when he's in the supposed airline terminal, and she asks,
Oh, okay, yeah.
she's asking him, "Are you gonna fly like first class, or business class, or just regular class?" Right? And he says, "Business, always business." And it's interesting because it's out of context. And when you watch the Greek, when he's saying it, he's looking at the other checker who you have the rate, like he's kind of looking at you, but he's not looking at you. He's looking at a checker who you imagine is a woman and maybe attractive. And he's got this kind of dreamy eyes. And he or she asks him, are you flying, a coach or business? And he's like, business, always business. And what's interesting is it's out of the context of what you would imagine or how this is said a million times in this series. Like
Hmm.
Prop Joe says it, Stringer Bell says it. Like it's always said, but he's saying it in a completely different context, which I found really interesting that that would be the epigraph.
Yeah, but I mean that's where the always comes in, right?
Yeah,
Even when it's not business, it's business.
but it does get back to the idea that you were bringing up a couple episodes ago, um, where of all of them, he's the one who shows the least flash, and that's what kind of sucks Sabatka in. And it's kind of like there's a joke in this idea of business, always business, as if it's not, as if it is just an expression, as if at this point in the series it's almost meaningless. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's like an excuse everyone always brings to the table when explaining away all the horrible things they're doing. Kind of like the logic of capital. And it's interesting that, you have these two main players who are flying away, leaving $15 million of drugs on the port, you know, bodies in their wake, pretty much helping devastate a whole part of a city, like supplying the means of that. And he's kind of jokingly, while looking at this woman checking his ticket, saying business, always business, talking about the class of ticket he's buying. So it's an economic factor, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seemed to me this time, because I'm always interested in those epigraphs, and it seemed to me such a complex layering of the epigraph to get at an issue with the Greek that I think we've seen, because this is the last we see of the Greek. And that scene is actually the last we see of the Greek. He's gone, right? Like you know, in the wind,
Yeah.
right? He's in the wind. He's
Yeah.
gone. So,
Interesting thing about that is, it sort of has the same kind of meaning as all in the game,
yeah.
but game and business seems like they might be separate things, but they're not, I guess.
Yeah, or even it almost seems like the game to some degree has a little bit more, at least when someone like Omar says it. There are rules to the game, right? And you play the game knowing all the risks and, involving all of that. And it seems like in this context at least, the idea of business becomes this, amorphous excuse for everything, right? Like the constant idea almost we had recently when the courts decided that, Hobby Lobby, like the corporation is a person, right? So there's no real responsibility for the individual within the act of what they did. And there's that real kind of strange liminal space we have with our relationship to corporations and businesses and ethos and ethics and a notion of what's right and wrong and a moral code. And I think this really gets at it, because business is always about invidious comparison and always about tearing apart rather than building any sense of a community. And
Yeah.
I know that's an overreading on this epigraph. I understand that, but it's one of the constant themes in seasons 1 and 2 that have emerged and have never been really explained or tried to kind of didactically suggest, because it could have. And, Simon in his own personal talking does a lot, really critique capitalism in America, but he doesn't in the show in the same way, or at least overtly. Um, and I like that. And I like that these really kind of subtle moments that are throwaway are reinforced by being epigraphs, then open up this whole complex reading about what is he saying.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It starts to move towards poetry.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole idea of the rules in the game and ethics in business, I think about it was Milton Friedman, basically says there is no such thing as social responsibility or very much ethics in business. It's all about maximizing profitability, and anything else, you're losing sight of the main goal.
Yeah, and an interesting lesson he's teaching Bondus, right?
Yeah.
To just walk away, like walk away from the carnage, walk away from the fit. Like knowing when to walk away is actually a valuable lesson, and it's just interesting that it comes out in this context, right? And it's you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, he has a great way of saying that too. Something about the lambs go to slaughter, but the man knows when to walk away.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Really interesting. So there's this whole kind of subtle critique of what we've seen again in these organizations as these kind of again and again as these subaltern businesses, legitimate businesses that are not legitimate because of their kind of political ethos, but they're run no differently. It's the same kind of. There's that great scene when Bodhi, when the other two dealers are saying, this is in episodes 10 or 11 of the season, saying like, don't we get severance pay when Bodhi's
yeah,
like, what? Like it just is awesome. Like they're trying to apply the logic of the business world to this, pretty cutthroat. Um, I think business, like it's where that whole idea of business starts to get blurry. Like they're expecting a certain amount of maybe social, social, how would you call it? Like social service, like maybe welfare, or maybe severance pay if you get laid off. Maybe some sort of security. And in this system, there's no room for it.
yeah,
It's just profitability, like you said. We go on all day.
yeah. All right.
Boom. Promise you. Okay. So the next one we have, I'm going to bring up. Uh, what's the name of the video? I don't know why I'm forgetting the name. Oh, I'll remember it. The one you open, QuickTime.
Oh,
Takes me long enough, doesn't it?
yeah.
Like, I'm a computer person. I should know this stuff. So here, we're going to go to the next one. Tell me what you think about this. Ready? Let's see if this works. It should work. Oh, the computer. Then
Oh,
let's see if this time player.
This episode has 90 odd
Did you hear
scenes. It
that?
was written with
yeah.
112 scenes. Many were
Yeah,
omitted.
let's start that again, so I don't talk over it. Yeah.
This episode has 90 odd scenes. It was written with 112 scenes. Many were omitted in the writing process, but still 91 scenes in an hour is a lot of information. Yet to be able to give the imagery its moment and pay off just as equal measure to the dialogue is a difficult task in this time constraint.
Yeah.
It sort of amazed me, because I don't 91 scenes,
Yeah. Exactly.
is like a lot. And in an hour, was there that much activity? But it ties together so seamlessly that it doesn't seem like that much.
And it was originally 112, she was saying. So they had
Yeah,
20 scenes.
yeah,
Insane.
yeah. Well, I guess you overplan and then tighten it up, right?
Absolutely, and
Yeah,
it shows you how crucial editing is, to actually cut more than you. I mean, I guess they say that's the real, when you get to video, right? Like the real genius of editing is not building more and more, but pairing off as much as you possibly can to tell the story with images. And she says something, and that's Karen Thorson, who's the producer, and she says something really interesting there. She says, in the title sequence, one of the things you'll notice is how important it is to try and tell the story through images. And all those images link back to the story in different episodes, etc. But also the way in which, and they really credit Robert Colesbury, who died between the end of season 2 and the beginning of season 3, which is a shame. He was also a detective in the season. He was he played it. He acted, he directed, he was the executive producer. I mean, he was alongside Simon. It seems like he was number 2, right? He was
yeah,
the brain behind this series, and I guess Edward Burns would be the other one in there. So it's interesting, although Edward Burns seemed to do a lot of the writing. But it's interesting that so much of what Colesbury seemed to be exploring, at least in this episode, which he directed, was the idea of movement in the camera. And he also directed the title sequence. And it's funny, once they started talking about it in the commentary, you notice just how much the camera moves fluidly between these images and between these shots. And it creates a sense of fluidity that I think they came back to, both the editor and the producer, while they were doing the commentary, just about how much more filmic that flow seemed than maybe traditional television.
yeah. It was because Robert Colesbury comes from the film tradition as opposed from the TV tradition. Um, and I'd say he supplied the vision for the series. I think,
Huh.
you know,
Absolutely.
yeah. Um, Simon and Burns, it's sort of like the story that's behind it, but the way it looks, the way it feels, and even the way it sounds. They mentioned that he was like Colesbury was very into like the sound design. Um,
They mentioned how present he was in the post production too, right? Like
yeah,
there for every edit. And even though he wasn't like necessarily over engineering it, I mean his voice and his space, his presence was always there, which is really interesting.
yeah,
I love the idea of 91 scenes because, like you, I would have never thought in a million years there were 91 scenes in an episode. I would think maybe 20 or 30. 91?
right, yeah,
It'd be interesting to go through and map an episode,
yeah,
every different scene. I guess you can find that
yeah.
in
Because I guess in some of those scenes where they have like conversations, you're getting a scene from one side of the table and then a scene from the other side of the table, and filming it, it's two separate things. But as you present it and edit it together, it's going to be one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting, and she talked about that a bit. How like they'll have one example is you have Daniels on the phone getting information about a particular thing, and at the same time you'll have his wife turning off the light in her room, kind of reinforcing the breakdown of their relationship. And there are moments there where they're getting the faxes of the men without their heads and hands, and
Yeah,
they're also telling information about that, and just the way in which they're really compressing the visual to take those 112 scenes and maybe make them 90 or what have you. Really interesting to hear that.
yeah, which is a great lead into the next video.
Well done. Let's bring it up and let's share it. Okay, let's go.
This episode has 90 odd scenes. It was written
No,
with 112 scenes.
hold on. I keep on getting the wrong one. Let me Paul.
Yeah,
I'll get it sooner or later. I'm not a complete amateur. Just a
yeah.
little. Okay, so here we go. Here's our next scene. And we should do this cleanly.
This is also an interesting way of folding several scenes together to tell a story instead of laying them out linearly. We're intercutting the story of what's going on with Jay Landsman delivering the news, but also receiving the news in the detail office. And by blending these two scenes together beautifully editorially, we shorten the length of time, expand the meaning of the scene, keep it visually interesting, and keep the viewer in.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the way it combined those two scenes, Freeman and Landsman in different offices, but you tie them together because it's part of the same thing.
Yeah. And it's funny. I didn't really think about the complexity there between, and the way in which you can show that. You can actually show those faxes and those images, which are disturbing. That time early on, not go into a long diatribe about what they mean and go deep into it, but then bring them up two or three more times out the episode and really create a sense of continuity too. Like there's that element of, by collapsing scenes like that, you create a deep sense of, not only is it much tighter, which is so hard to do with video, but it's also creating a sense of continuity over time. And between the two, it's an elegant effect, which they repeat again and again, how much more filmic The Wire is than television-based talking head shot to a close-up, which is really easy to shoot, and then an establishing shot, and just nothing in between, no real flow, right? Kind of like Seinfeld, right? You see the building, it's Seinfeld in his kitchen, right? There's no flow in Seinfeld, right? It's just a predefined thing, and it's all about Jerry Seinfeld telling his jokes and everyone joking around. And it's a completely different feel in The Wire, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, those images, they are pretty horrific. It's bodies with no hands and no heads. Um, but they just like, they show them because it's something they handle, but they don't like dwell on it. They don't. No one freaks out about it. It's just business.
Yeah, business, business, huh? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's a little disturbing though, because those are hard to watch. Those are hard to look at. They're just.
Yeah.
I mean, and then when they put him in front of Surge later on, it gets no easier. So, it's
Yeah.
interesting. Maybe that's not hard for you because you're so hardened being up in Pennsylvania. It's not easy to watch, Paul. We're very puritanical in our own southern way.
Yeah.
Let me bring the next one. Here we go.
Bubbles raids the ambulance for drugs. Bob put it together and actually made it a scene. He put sound effects. There's several camera angles. Bubbles tries to get rid of the stuff that he's been nailed with taking. And there's a line here at the end of the scene. And that was just all kind of give and take. And I think it was a really excellent example of how they work together as a team.
Yeah, so what she was talking about at the beginning was Bubbles raids the ambulance. That's all that was in the script for that scene. And everything you see there was put together in the filming, the editing, between the actors doing it, deciding how it goes, and the director deciding how it films, and what sounds have to go in there as well.
Yeah, what's interesting too is, I mean, that scene was really, it was another example that I really liked about The Wire. And The Wire's, people call it, and they've called it early on, and I really like this kind of Balzacian universe, which means there's all these different characters that come in and out of the fabric, and we'll see that a lot more with McNulty in season 3 when he kind of comes back. It kind of goes into the background, and other people come forward to the foreground, like Marlowe. But one of the things I really liked about that episode that they weren't talking about that really struck me was, you see Santangelo again.
Mm-hmm.
And you see him as this character who's coming in and who's arresting Bubbles, and then he has contact with Griggs. And he's just a character that and that, even though you saw him once or twice in season 2, like, it's not like the universe is any less real because of that. And I really kind of like that element here. And then Bubbles saying the Johnny good looking out and the back and forth there um, was interesting, but I just think it's also the characterization that's able to so seamlessly carry through episode to episode, season to season. Even if you haven't seen this character for 10 episodes, you still,
Mhm.
or at least I still kind of relate, understand, and look at him for a second on his career path, which is, he's a traffic cop again. You know what I mean? It's interesting.
Yeah. Um, yeah, but I think this comes up later that, he actually likes doing that, being on the street better than, you know, having to deal with mystery murders.
Well, it's true though too that Jimmy finds himself in that situation in not too long either, right? So like,
Yeah.
it's not something that we don't see in other forms.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go to the next one, and this one is five, and
Yeah.
let's take a look at this. And I really like this one as well. I liked it when she was talking about this.
Here we are at this big, beautiful wide shot. Her head tilts down, and we start the next scene with her head tilted down as well. It's kind of a beautiful little poetry going on there with the editing.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. The way you're transitioning from one scene to another and it has to make sense somehow, and um, having that similar movement, the head down in each one, even though it's on the back in one and the front in the other, it's the same kind of thing, and it ties it together in a
Absolutely.
very subtle way.
Well, and you also see that, once she pointed that out, and I've seen it in other episodes in previous seasons or this season. It's something is when um, Griggs is kind of getting into a bit of a fight with uh, her partner about the baby coming, and she's not really dealing with the fact. And she goes into this kind of sigh, this long face, and transitions right into, I think, Nick's girlfriend with a very similar face in the bathroom, in the new witness protection. And there's all these kind of seamless poetic transitions, which are so different than even some of the ones in the first episode or the first season, which were transition to the city, big, big skyscraper, and then you're in. They
Mhm.
still do that sometimes, but those are kind of more Seinfeld-esque, like establishing shot in. These are far more fluid and poetic, where it's like one character who pensive, had an issue, going to another character, and really focusing on the human relations between this, you know, distributed but really intimate web of people whose lives are all affected and affecting one another. Um, it's interesting, those transitions, and I think they're far, that idea of poetry she touches on really captures, I think, the way in which this show is really trying to kind of, you know, create this, Balzacian, for lack of a better
Mm.
word, web of events and people in a universe that is Baltimore.
Yeah, I think, now that you mentioned it, like those establishing shots of the exteriors of the buildings that show us that we're going to a different spot, a different place and time. Um, Maybe by this point in the series, it's a 12th episode, we know enough about the characters and where they're at and what they're doing that they don't need that, you know.
Yeah, it happens. And if you get those establishing shots, they're more longing, right? Like when Edie is looking after Frank Sabaka died, and they're looking at the establishing shot of the container where Frank used to sit, you know, and that's just
Yeah.
an empty. It's like an establishing shot that goes nowhere because there's nothing there. So you still have them, but they don't lead anywhere, right? The establishing shot of the Union, you can't get in it,
Mhm.
right? The door's locked. So
Yeah.
it's like these establishing shots that actually don't lead you anywhere, which is an interesting kind of idea.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one is about editing as well. Excuse me. And this is about editing. Um, let's play this. Give me a second. Okay. Here we go.
That's the Greek right there.
That was probably an insert shot, but yet you don't feel that that was put there after the fact, wouldn't you say, Tom? And
Yeah.
it's just very
Very again.
subtly worked in.
You picked that any
Let's
side?
go
A little
back
bit
to
of a
that. Do you mind
move,
if we do that
somebody's
again?
hand.
Yeah.
I just want to play that again.
That's the Greek right there.
That was probably an insert shot, but yet you don't feel that that was put there after the fact, wouldn't you say, Tom? And
Yeah.
it's just very
again.
subtly worked in.
You picked that any side?
A little bit of a move, somebody's hand. It's just all these little details make a difference when you put the piece together.
And
Yeah, I know why you captured that.
Because all the pieces matter. Yeah.
And that's the meta moment when
Yeah.
it's actually what it is to go into telling stories, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and we also saw Santangelo in there with McNulty and Greggs. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it brings it back. And that connection with Bubbles. And I love how Bubbles was like, Kima, what are you doing? You know, I was worried about you when you were up in there. I mean, I love the personal relationship between Bubbles and Kima. I love that there's space in these institutions to play. That's one of the few places, and she still wants something out of the transaction. It's still very transactional, but, you know, there's play there. You know what I mean? Like, there truly is play, and it's almost reassuring.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was interesting. I mean, at the end of the first season, she's, ready to put him up in an apartment if he wants to get clean. At the end of this season, he gets busted for trying to rob an ambulance, and she's flat out ready to send him to jail for that.
Exactly. It is interesting. Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, and they talk a bit about the rack focus with Nick, with that scene of Nick, and there's that whole scene we just watched. But here's another image that has Nick in the background, or in the fore. I mean, he's kind of almost not. He's in the background, but Sabaka's presence in the foreground, even if blurred, is really ominous.
Yeah, he's deceased by the beginning of this episode, but he's always there as part of the story. And yeah, the rack focus, in the previous scene, there were parts where discussion would go from Nick to talking about Sabatka, and the focus would shift from Nick in the foreground to Sabaka's picture in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really elegantly done. When she took us through it, when Karen Thorson took us through, like, hey, here's what's happening, and here's how it looks, I was really like, wow, I know what's happening, but again, it's like with the sound, you don't necessarily think about it, right?
Yeah.
It's so seamless, it's almost natural. And it takes someone walking you along and saying, well, actually, this is an effect that someone spent time designing and thinking about and intentionally doing to kind of map Nick and Sabaka's father-son relationship or surrogate father-son relationship cleanly onto what this means. It's cool to hear that this isn't a natural piece, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're like brought up with the language of video, so we understand that stuff intuitively, but unless you're in that business, you really don't think about what's actually happening there and how it goes together.
Yeah. And the thing to me too is, I remember seeing, Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time. I was like 9 or 10, maybe 11, I don't know. Whenever 81 was, I was 10, whatever. So I think that's when it came out, 82. Maybe I was 11. Either way, I didn't know exactly how film worked. I thought that they got a camera and they followed Indiana Jones through all these crazy adventures from beginning to end. And that was the film. Like, I didn't understand there was an artifice, that there was a creation, that there was a thing called editing, that they put all these pieces together to create. I just thought it was this magical story, and you don't go into the production of the book, whether it's a novel or the creation of the film. Like, part of its magic is its demystification, or its mystification. Once you start demystifying it, it loses some of that magic, but then it actually gets more interesting in many ways once you start thinking about things like intentionality and design and meanings and themes and motifs, right? That's part of the learning process, storytelling. So it's cool to see in The Wire, even though I've been trained for decades now to read critically and to think critically, just how easy it is. And I think it's a reassuring thing to go back into the mystification, like to be willfully pulled back into just the enjoyment of the experience. And what's interesting on this third round of The Wire for me is that the the magic of the series just doesn't get demystified to the point where I don't see it as magical anymore. It just becomes that much more amazing to think about how many different pieces they did have to align in how many different perfect ways to make something so kind of, powerful. So it almost becomes that much more mystified in this weird way by demystifying it. Like you can't escape it. Now, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
Yeah,
it's a crazy thing.
yeah. I mean, we're talking about storytelling here, but there's two things there: story and telling. And you look at the story, and that's really powerful in itself. But then you step back and look at how it's being told, which is what that commentary is talking about. And I think it adds another, level to it. If it's really well told, and you see all that goes into that, it's just a deeper level of fascination with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, I think, and it's really holding its own through two seasons. This show has not jumped the shark, and it won't in season three. And that's hard to do too. Is also not only the to be able to do it, but then to sustain it, and then to sustain it when between seasons. And this was interesting. You lose seemingly two of the visions behind it. One an editing vision, and one a kind of a broader visual vision for the entire series. So there's also that they're juggling. So it'd be interesting to see. I don't know how much Colesbury, how deep they were into season three by the time he passed away. But it would be interesting to see if some of that stuff changes as a result. And I think the same thing happened to Simon when he was working along someone on Treme. One of his executive producers on Treme died.
Hmm.
It's kind of crazy to think about that.
That guy's the kiss of death.
Yeah, exactly. You don't ever be his executive producer. Okay. So speaking of the kiss of death, let me pull up this next screenshot, which I think you'll appreciate.
Yeah, I like that. The thing I liked about this was that name of the reporter there, Tom Zimney. He's the other guy that's doing the commentary on this episode along with Karen Thorson. He's an editor on the series. And they just sort of like stuck his name in there as a cameo.
An Easter egg, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that stuff in the series. Like Bob Colesbury was Ray Cole in the series.
Right.
Jay Landsman is a character in this series. He's also is an actor that we saw in some of the last few episodes playing Bunny Colvin's assistant there.
Oh, is that Landsman?
Yeah, yeah. And the other guy that shows up, I guess this is in the beginning of season 3. You see the deacon preacher guy that Colvin talks to.
That's right.
That, I guess, was Simon's template for Avon Barksdale. That guy's real life.
Wow.
And so, yeah, the way these things tie together is really interesting. And then we saw Simon in the previous episode himself as a reporter.
So who's the guy who's in season 3 who's Wallace's kind of confidant?
Wallace's confidant.
The guy who owns the rim spot.
Oh, that guy.
If anyone, he might not be anyone.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a guy. I think we see him in season 3, or I don't know. He's a guy who works as Omar's bodyguard when he was in prison.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if that shows up in season 3 or season 4. But one of those guys was like the template for Omar.
Ha. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the next one. This one is going to be lights out.
Yeah.
Let's look at this. And I think I already brought this up. So me and you we're really connected, Paul.
In this scene, you just have these little subtle touches that make it. He's looking at the light under the bedroom. His wife's walked in there. There's a separation that's developed between them in their marriage, but we're not really told that. We're just shown these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole thing that's going on in that story that, there's that separation, and this scene is kind of emphasizing it. But all they give you is the light going out under the doorway. Like they don't have to tell you anything more than that. And that's kind of how they get 91 scenes in an hour. But yeah, it's part of the depth of the story that's going on in there.
I also think that that's part of that. I mean, it came up, the poetry between the editing, right? Between going from one person putting their head down to Herc pulling his head up, and you kind of have that transition. But I mean, the way that Simon said from season 1, episode 1, when he did his commentary, like they were going to try and tell a story, and they were going to try and rethink the film, the TV kind of genre, so that they could tell almost like novel-esque narrative in 13 episodes, so that they could focus on these details and they could really build character and they could have trajectories across episodes. And when you do that, not only are you able to kind of maybe condense like this, but when you do little kind of meaningful, kind of minimalistic poems like that, like Lights Off, Relationship Over, Lieutenant Daniels going back to his room alone, watching, kind of pretty base television about Sabaka in his underwear. Like, that's all told. And that message is clear, and it's done precisely, right? And that's what poetry is. It's the precision of language to kind of communicate a thought, emotion, or idea in another way that would be impossible. And I think that does get to this element of poetry. And I think the format that they decided to build it around enabled it. Like you weren't stuck in that formula. You could actually, because you changed the format, you could change the way you tell stories, and you could change how you told that story. And you could introduce a whole nother level of visual symbolism and visual metaphor into that story. And I think it paid huge dividends because it was a big risk.
Yeah.
I'm glad you agree with me, Paul.
Yeah.
Problems right now. Here's the next one.
Yeah, this is just a shot of. Oh, let me get that back. This is just a shot of the hotel room where Nick and his girlfriend and daughter are being hit out by the police. But they mentioned it in the commentary. This is like a little detail that the set designer brought in, but leaving that towel on the floor as they're going into it means, it just shows how shabby the place is. Like they didn't even bother to clean up after the last person left.
What's going on there, Paul? I had to get something from my throat. Right?
Oh, I was talking about the detail in this scene where of that towel on the floor. They talked about in the commentary. There's just like a little detail the set designer did to show the shabbiness of the hotel. They didn't clean up after the last people left.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and it's funny. You see it, and it's almost like she said it. It's like a subliminal message, right? You see it, it tells the story, you move on. You have the impression. Like, he doesn't have to go in and say, what a dump, right? Or like, there doesn't have to be this big, this, it's like, that's all it took. It's that one element. Like, it was a dumpy hotel, motel to begin with, but the towel on the floor just brought it to another level, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a beautiful way of kind of communicating, again, visually, right? I mean, it's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Really dealing with an editor and producer.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's visual and design because it was put there on purpose, for a purpose, to do that,
Absolutely. And it's interesting because Karen Thorson is the producer of post-production, right? So she's actually managing post-production, making sure everything gets done, making sure everyone's on their A game, making sure that shit's working. And so she knows, you know, and she's part of all this. So it's very interesting to hear from the people who are actually making this work. And that's one of the things about TV shows or films, you know, because Simon will be like, David Simon, his vision, right? And then Colesbury, you realize, like, well, a lot of it was his vision, or Burns, well, a lot of it was his writing. And then you'll see people like Thorson or Jen Ralston or the actors. And it's like, this is not a single vision. And a great masterpiece like this, unlike maybe, say, Shakespeare's works or whatever, is not done by one person. It's done by a unique combination of many talents in a time and a place. And that's cool, actually. Rather than that being a bad thing, I think that's a beautiful thing because it's so much harder to align. So when it comes out, it's that much more powerful.
Yeah, it's harder to align, and it brings more depth to it as well, I think. In the commentary on episode 11, Richard Price talked about it. He was the writer, and he's a novelist, and he's done, like, Clockers, we know about.
Yeah. And The Wanderers, which I loved.
Yeah, but he talked about the political aspect of it, you know, that he has absolutely zero interest in that area. He actually had this great metaphor that, like, when he's writing those scenes, he feels like Helen Keller on a snowboard in the Alps. You know, that he just doesn't know what's going on. So there are other people involved in there that know that side of it that Simon's worked with in the, I guess, in the newspaper industry. And he sort of defers to them as to how to write those things.
Yeah.
If he did it himself, it wouldn't be there, or it would go flat. But he's got this other vision that he can pull in, and they tie it together.
And it's when, like, George Pelicanos talks about, like, his big thing is eating joints in Baltimore. Like, he wants to talk about where you get the best hot dog, or have his characters argue about what the best hot dog in Baltimore is, or just, like, stuff that, like, you know, you obviously, like, that's a personal element. Like, when someone has a style that they bring to it. And the genius of being able to bring in all these different layers of styles from all these, you know, really good writers and producers and sound editors, right? You have a universe, you know, and it's what, I know I'm getting off track here, but it's what I would hope ultimately, like, a second level of DS106 would be. It's like, it's not about your own individual work now. It's about a whole semester about building something together. You know, a universe of people building a project, a film. Why not? Like, a film and a series. And they produce it. And they work together as a crew to produce it. And I think with the skills they get from this class, they could. So.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it also ties to what's going on this week, is we've got groups of people developing audio projects.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to bring their own part to it, and together they're going to bring it all together.
Yeah, that's right. Cool. Yeah, I really love that. Okay, so let's go to the next video, which is
Videotape.
a videotape.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go.
Technology
Oh, wait, hold on.
to the show.
Let me actually bring it up so people can see it. All right. You know, I'm a professional. I don't know if you know that about me, Paul, but people really commend me about my professionalism.
Technology
Oh, hold
to
on.
the show. The
Hold on.
scenes.
Let
so
me
that
start from the beginning. The professionalism showing through. Go.
Technology to the show. Build it into the scenes so that it's meaningful and interesting to look at.
Flashing a badge?
Looks like it.
That's something we don't see.
And actually, many things that have been revealed are cutting edge tools
Still on.
that our detectives work with. That being one, the multiplexing and the ability to zoom in on a license plate.
Oh, Jesus.
So for
Yeah.
techno geeks, it's just as real as
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think she reinforces something I think we've been talking about now for 11 episodes. The interesting, and I have a post brewing, hopefully it will be written sometime before 2015, about season 2 and technology. I mean, we saw it in the last episode with the texting, the ability to triangulate the position of the texter based on satellite. we have this one, the multiplexing, and how they do that to save money. And then this guy's got that little thing, he can break it all apart and kind of break it down. And yeah, I do. I actually really like the way they use technology in The Wire. And it seemed so old school in season one, and then season two, it was like a real focus. Not that it wasn't in season one, but it almost tracked the rapid explosion of technology for some of the basic investigative tools that they're using. And she got at it beautifully, I thought, by explaining how they were using it in this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, the explosion of technology. That's when you're in the middle of it, when you live through it, you see it, but it doesn't. I don't know if it hits quite as hard just how rapidly it transitions. And when you watch this, we're going to be looking at 4 different years of series here. You're going to see a lot of changes. And it's really just 4 years of changes, but you're going to see it really quick. It's pretty impressive.
It is impressive, and it's right before or right on the cusp of the social media explosion. And they almost touch on that in episode 5 or season 5. But it's interesting because you see the rapid explosion they're talking about with stuff like, streaming video, like we see early on when those guys are cutting up the product and the FBI's got the video in there, and we see it with the texting. We see it with the triangulation of positionality, with the geo stuff. We see it with the cloning of the computer, the cloning of the pager. We'll see it with the burner cell phones in season 3, right? So it's really interesting. Like, I learned about burner cell phones because of The Wire. So
Yeah.
and I have one now because I don't have a regular cell phone. So it's an interesting kind of exploration of technology. And she's right. Like, techno geeks, like, I was compelled by the whole idea of the multiplexing. And I don't necessarily think I'm a geek, but I mean, that stuff is compelling, and knowing how it works is interesting.
Yeah. I just love the reaction to watching that video. The FBI guy in bunk as they're watching the scene,
Yeah, I mean, they're like, it's weird. It's a snuff film, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. The other side of it. You're absolutely right. Okay.
Right.
So this is called, this next image we're bringing up here is called the bead. Let me bring it up here. This is Daniels.
Yeah. I forget which student brought up the worry beads.
Yeah.
That
Linda's been talking about it, and Chris has been talking.
Yeah, that the Greek had, and just before the scene, he was getting on the airport, feeling his pockets, and did you forget something? He's like, oh, it doesn't matter, and they found his worry beads still in the office there.
And that's a beautiful shot right there.
Yeah.
Even if you just, I mean, besides the context, like the bed, Daniel's head, the rule of thirds, absolutely at play here. I love the lines that are cutting across the bed, the bold yellow police. It's just a gorgeous shot.
Yeah. And the beads had it central focus, Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Love it. Okay. Another shot that we're going to look at is this one. So this is another shot of Daniels. This is another brilliant shot.
We've seen a lot of this kind of thing in where the background is sort of blurred out and just makes this artistic sort of statement behind the scene. I think that has something to do with the kind of lens they use. I don't know enough about photography to really talk about that. I think it's something I got from Sidney Lumet, that idea. But yeah, it's the focus is on him, and then whatever is just behind him is so blurred out that it's just like this abstraction.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think, Tom Woodward, I'd love to have him do a photo safari with the students in ES106, or Alan Levine, or a lot of those photographers who I'm really impressed with. Darcy Norman's another one. And there are many others. Those are just a few I know. There is a way you could do this with a DSLR. I see Tom Woodward do this all the time, really heavy focus on the subject, but the background is blurred, and it's blurred in an abstract, conceptual way that really creates, I think, a beautiful effect. Just gorgeous. And this is a good example. And I don't know if it's just the lens or if it's a combination of lens and focus and ways in which your camera can, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I think it's like the length of the lens affects the depth of focus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I love it.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Speaking of shots, uh, get this one to come up. This is going to be, turn this one off, get rid of this, and we'll go and we'll find the horse. The horse is a horse, of course, of course. The list of the horse is the crazy Mr. What's his name? Palooka?
Paluska, something like that. Yeah.
Mr. Palooka. What are you
Yeah.
still
Just the angle of that shot, I mean, that is about as dramatic as you can get, looking up at his nose hairs.
That's Citizen Kane right there.
Yeah. I believe this is from the closing montage where they're like flashing around at different things that are going on.
Let me ask you, and we'll go look at this final scene, this final image. But I have a question to ask you. I'm wondering what you might think about it, because we had the second time with the closing montage, right? They brought that up and they talked about that, and I was wondering, and here's the next one. This is the one with Nikki.
The thing that interests me about this one is that tattoo on the back of his neck. It's pi, the Greek letter, and I'm not sure like what it means to Nick there, why he had it tattooed on the back of his neck. But in math, it has to do with a circle, and I think it ties into that idea how everything is coming back around on itself.
Yeah, and it's going back to quiet, and there's a kind of, I mean, and so this brings me to a question I want to throw out at you. Like they mentioned again, like at the end of every episode, every season, they do a montage, and this montage was trying to bring together a lot of different things, like the White Street kids in the Polish area, the Black Street kids in the West, the Terrace, like just a whole nother kind of visual, and it had the sound underneath it. And just before this, when Daniels was talking to the FBI agent, whose name I'm forgetting, but will come to me, was talking to him about not pulling a mean streets, which means having the music in line with the content and the talk. They cut to this scored montage about the end of the season, and I understand they do it, but for me, I mean, you can't look away from a good montage, right? It's like a train wreck. Like you can't look away. It's good. You watch it and everything. But it's so not in line with the way you've been telling the story for the previous hour or for the previous 13 hours. Although there is another montage or two in season 2. I don't think this is the only one. But I don't know how I feel about the montage. Like, I don't necessarily vehemently hate it, but I do think it kind of, for me, feels like they have to pull back into TV mode. And they have to wrap everything off. Like, they talk so much about it being filmic, and we're doing film here. And then at the end of the season, they have to go back into TV mode and secure everything up. Why?
I don't know if it's like a kind of punctuation, just to close it down. So we're seeing something very different from the way the rest of it has been done. And it's not unrelated, but it is, stylistically very different to do a montage there. Yeah, I kind of see it as a closure type thing.
But it's just interesting because even the episode itself understands itself as just a port in the storm to the next season, right? Like, so it's not even like, and I love the beginning of season 3, episode 1. I mean, brilliant. But even that, like, they're trying to put in the politics. They're trying to put in, like, they have the ones opening in the condominium, and they have right? They have the senator there with the shovel. And I just feel like sometimes it's like they've done such a good job of expanding the episodes in the season. And then in that last 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes more, there's this like prolonged kind of very TV like, or even music video like, MTV like collage, montage that I think is outside the entire season and really outside the entire aesthetic. And I don't think it adds that much. In
Mhm.
fact, it might kind of suggest, like I said, that they're just trying to be a TV show and wrap everything up. Like a great film doesn't have, I think, a, a kind of summation of everything that came before to give you final closure, right? Oftentimes it leaves you like you had. Like, why not just have Nick walking alongside the cop car, looking out at the pier or yeah the pier or the port or whatever, and then
Mhm.
that's it. Like, would you get anything less than seeing all these different people in all these different places? It's like I don't think it made it any more powerful.
Yeah, if you think about it, they could have just like snipped that whole thing and have that scene with him on the fence and walking away, and then fade to black, and that would end it.
It
Um,
would have been a truly quiet ending
yeah,
rather than, I mean, they're trying to argue that it was a quiet ending, but it's not a quiet ending if you have a 2.5 minute song with, you know, a montage of all of Baltimore. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing and that it's a kind of filmic faux pas. Like, I'm not pretending, but it does break with some of the logic they're arguing again and again about the wire breaking from TV visuals.
hmm maybe they figure they can only break so much. I don't know.
Maybe they're not as revolutionary as I thought. Maybe the show is a sham, and we're starting to. Maybe that's what next season should be. Maybe we should start bringing on the critique. Enough of this, parading around the wire. They have to pay now, Paul. Right? I'm going to
Okay, so we spent 2 seasons building up, and we'll tear them apart the next two.
tear them apart. Scene by scene. All right. Well, that's season 2, episode 12. We wrapped up season 2.
Yeah,
And despite my problems with the montage, I love season 2.
yeah.
One of my
It's.
favorites.
I think it seems that most people are kind of down on season 2.
That's right. They
You
are.
know, I mean, I'm down on season 5. Yeah, because that's.
It's just really hard to compare with season
Yeah,
1, which
yeah,
watching it for the third time is so tight.
yeah.
It's such a masterpiece. And I didn't see that the first time around because I was so like, oh, it's another cop show. But watching that, it's hard to compete with how tight that season is.
Yeah.
Season 3 and season 4, season 4 is its own thing, and season 4, I can't wait to talk about that. But season 2, I mean, I know there's a lot of haters on season 2, but I wave to the haters. I think it's a really great season.
Yeah. I wonder if part of it is that it doesn't tie into the others as well. Like you've got Prop Joe comes from season 2, and Sergey is going to show up again later. Um, but a lot of that story, those characters, they're just like done with. The dock workers, they don't come back.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it does seem a little bit of its own.
Yeah.
I thought they did a pretty good job still keeping the Stringer Bell and um, the detail together that you wouldn't feel that much. Like there was still so much more consistency. And I
Yeah.
think, you could argue like the dock workers are done. Like,
Yeah.
like that story's been told. Like,
Yeah.
no, there's no ongoing narrative about labor, right? I think Simon says in a separate interview, like, that's the problem right now. America lost the labor struggle. There is no more labor struggle. And that's a big part of his broader politic about all of what's going on. And so it's one of the things I really appreciate about season 2. Simon is actually very poetically building in his politic into that season, and it's I think it's really well done. I mean, it's not perfect, but damn near it.
There is a scene, and I think it's in season 5, where Nick shows up again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a crowd scene, like someone's giving a speech, one of the politicians, and a few people in the back are heckling, and it's Nick, and he's saying something or other, and the police drag him away, and then there's this like conversation, who was that? Some nobody. It's really easy to miss because it's a little thing, but he's there.
Wow. So he does show up again.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see I didn't even know this, but the student post, that Nick actually shows up again in Orange is the New Black as the prison guard. I know that character. I didn't make the connection.
Well, he wears a disguise, right, with the mustache.
But I actually have a lot more respect for him as an actor now, because he's a real character in Orange is the New Black. So, I mean, not a good character per se, on a personal level, but he acts it beautifully. Yeah, cool. All right. So maybe we'll seal this one up, and then we'll do season 3, episode 1.
Okay.
Just clean this one up.
All right. You can stop this. We'll say goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah.